Once upon a time, there was a miller who was very poor, but he had a beautiful daughter. It so happened that he had to go and speak to the king, and in order to make himself look more important, he said to the king, "I have a daughter who can spin straw into gold." "This is an art which pleases me well," said the king. "If your daughter is as clever as you say, then bring her to my palace tomorrow, and I will put her to the test." When the miller's daughter came to the palace the next morning, the king took her to a room He gave her quite a large basket full of straw and a spinning wheel. And he said, "All the straw must be spun into gold until the morning, or you shall die." Thereupon he himself locked the door and left her in the room quite alone. And there was the poor miller's daughter, and for the life of her did not know what to do. She had no idea how straw could be spun into gold. She grew more and more frightened, and at last began to weep. When suddenly a little trapdoor in the floor opened, and a little mannequin jumped out. "Good evening, Mistress Miller. Why are you crying so?" "Alas," she said, "I have to spin all this straw into gold, and I do not know how to do it." "What will you give me if I do it for you?" "My necklace." So the mannequin took the necklace, stood by the wheel, and started spinning. And by morning he had spun all the straw into gold. At daybreak the king was already there. And when he saw that all the straw had been spun into gold, he was astonished and delighted, for he had grown fond of the beautiful miller's daughter. But his advisers still had not gold enough, and convinced him to lock her up another night. They had an even larger basket of straw brought into the room, and they commanded the miller's daughter to spin that into gold also during the course of this night, if she valued her life. There was the miller's daughter again, and did not know what to do, when for the second time the trapdoor opened, and the little mannequin appeared and said, "What will you give me if I spin all this straw into gold for you also?" "The ring on my finger," the miller's daughter said. So the mannequin took the ring, stood himself by the wheel, and began to spin once more. When the king came the next morning, he rejoiced that all the straw had been spun into gold again. But his advisers became even more greedy and still had not gold enough, and they convinced the king to lock her up yet another night. They went and fetched an even larger basket of straw for her to spin during the course of that next night. "If you succeed," they said, "you can marry the king. But if you fail, you must die." Again, the miller's daughter grew more and more frightened and did not know what to do, when the mannequin came for the third time and said, "Dear Mistress Miller, what will you give me if I spin all this straw into gold for you also?" "Alas," sighed the girl, I have nothing left to give you." "Well then, promise me that if you shall become queen, you will give me your first child." "Who knows whether that will ever happen," thought the miller's daughter, and not knowing how else to help herself in this strait, she promised the mannequin what he wanted, and therefore he stood himself by the wheel for a third time and started spinning all that straw into gold. When the king saw that for the third time the miller's daughter had managed to spin all the straw into gold, he was so happy and relieved that he could free her from her prison that he took her in marriage. And the beautiful miller's daughter became a queen. A year or so after, the queen brought a beautiful child into the world. It was dearly loved, and the queen never gave another thought to the mannequin. Until one night he appeared in her chamber and said, "Now, Mistress Queen, give me what you promised." The queen was horror-struck at the thought of having to give her child away, and she offered the mannequin all the riches in the kingdom. But he said, "No, something alive is dearer to me than all the treasures in the world." Thereupon the queen began lamenting and crying, so that the mannequin had pity on her and said, "I will give you 3 days' time, and if by that time you can guess my name, you shall keep your child." You can imagine that the Queen was awake all night thinking of all the names that she'd heard. And when the mannequin came back the next day and said, "So, Mistress Queen, what is my name?" she started with, "Perhaps your name is Casper." "No, that is not my name." "Then perhaps your name is Melchior." "No, that is not my name." "Perhaps your name is Balthasar." "No, that is not my name." The Queen had messengers sent out all over the neighbourhood to learn of the most curious and uncommon names. So when the mannequin came back the next day and said, "So, Mistress Queen, what is my name?" she said, "Perhaps your name is Shortlegs, or Sheepshanks, or Lace Rips." But to all of them, the little mannequin said, "No, that is not my name." Now the Queen grew more and more desperate, and when her messenger returned the next day, he said he did not find any new names, but when I came to the end of the forest, where the fox and the hare bid each other good night, I saw a little hut, and before the hut a fire was burning, and around the fire quite a ridiculous looking man was hopping and singing, "Today I bake, tomorrow I brew, the next day I will get the young Queen's child. Ha! Glad am I that no one knew that Rumpelstiltskin I am styled." You can imagine how glad the Queen was when she heard these news. And when the mannequin came the next day and said, "Mistress Queen, what is my name?" she started with, "Is your name Conrad?" "No, that is not my name." "Is your name Henry?" "No, that is not my name." "Then your name must be Rumpelstiltskin." "The devil has told you that! The devil has told you that!" the little mannequin shouted, and in his fury he stomped around the room and screamed and pulled his hair, and just as he was about to rip himself in half, the Queen said, "Calm yourself, my little creature. You, unlike I, have a lot of special gifts. I think we had quite enough of spinning straw into gold. But what about your baking and your brewing?" So the Queen suggested to the King that Rumpelstiltskin would be made the royal brewer and baker of the court. So in the basement they made him his own little kitchen, in which he spent a lot of time baking delicious sourdough bread and brewing lots of kombucha and making a lot of sauerkraut. So everyone was so incredibly well and healthy that their happily ever after lasted for eternity.